welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. As always, it is Tuesday, June 4th, and we have a great show for you today. First, we're going to start talking a little bit about all the changes that are going on around college football and how this might be the time that we remember in about 20 years about just how much it defined this sport that we all love. Then we'll get into a little bit of the College Football Hall of Fame list. Some of the new people that are up for the Hall of Fame have been released, and there's two guys in there that I'm pretty certain are going to make that list. And then we'll get into my all-transfer team on the offensive side of the ball. Definitely a ton of transfers to go through, a really, really good group this year, and we'll definitely break down who I think are the best of the bunch. Then we'll get into the group of 5 playoff contenders, tons of people that can definitely make a run in the playoff, but there are a couple in particular that I want to highlight today, and then we'll finish it off with a Top 10 Tuesday and talk about the best games of 2024. There are incredible amounts of really, really good games, so it was a little bit hard to make that list, but I feel like I have a pretty good 10. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, get to know each other a little bit, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for all of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because this has been a very, very weird time in college football. I think we can all agree on that. The past couple of years have been really weird with conference realignment, NIL, and transfer portal, and everything in between. There's been a lot of change, and college football has been under a lot of a microscope, I suppose, and a lot of new people are coming in on the party, and some people that we don't necessarily want in on the party. But I think we've all gotten to a spot that we all kind of knew was happening. I think a lot of us were scared of it happening, but it felt like we were heading that way the second that NIL and transfer portal were introduced to this sport, which is essentially the sport is about to be reinvented, and not necessarily at the grassroots part of it where we're still going to have the traditions. We're still going to have the chants. The Saturday in that stadium is still going to be the Saturday in that stadium. It's still going to have that same atmosphere, but a lot of the stuff around the sport is going to be changing drastically. And with that, a lot of the stuff that we love about the sport is going to change. And that's just kind of the way of things. So we're going to have to kind of figure out where we go from here. And obviously, I wish that some of the fans had a little bit bigger say on where we go from here. But that's something we'll kind of dive into. So first, let's get into just kind of what's at stake, why there's so many different things that are going to be changing over the next couple of months, really, and how it can kind of impact the future. So the biggest thing is there's a huge opening for leadership in this sport. No one really knows where the answers are coming from in general for all of the problems that we're facing today. I think one thing that has happened over the last couple of years, if anything has happened to this sport, is the NCAA has lost a lot of power over conferences, over individuals in particular. Greg Sankey is none too happy with them right now. So there are a lot of people in this sport that don't necessarily trust the NCAA or don't necessarily think they have the teeth that they had, a decade ago or even 5 years ago. So that leaves kind of a vacuum, right? That leaves an opening for someone to step up to the plate, and that is a very precarious situation, especially when you're in this point where college football is in particular, because I think we all understand when there is disorder, when there's dysfunction, when there's turmoil, there's a opening, I suppose, to make a lot of money, and that's something that is going to be coming down the road here pretty soon in college football. What form that takes, I'm not exactly sure. I think there's a number of different routes that people will go down. We talked about private equity and how that is a very dangerous proposition for college sports and something that they do not want to get involved in, at least from my point of view, but maybe they might have to. So it feels like there's this big opening for someone to step up to the plate and give an answer for some of the problems that we're facing. Now we have to be careful about who that person is. The sport is under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of microscopes, a lot of people are looking at it that haven't before, frankly, and it's because they don't much care about the sport. They don't much care about really the players in a lot of different ways. And we, I guess not necessarily we technically, but a lot of people in this sport are going to have to decipher who's who. And it's going to be a very, very hard thing to do, and it's going to be something that is going to be defining for the sport going forward, because there's going to be a lot of people that don't have the right intentions that want to get on the sport to make a quick buck. There's also going to be people that want to save college athletics and do right by the student athletes and do the things that we need to be done, and we'll have to figure out who those people are. So it'll be fascinating to kind of watch that. I think one of the bigger things with this House settlement and all of the confusion around it is, how is this money going to be split up? There's $20 million around pretty much every college. You can go under $20 million, which is likely what a lot of colleges will do, because they're not necessarily sitting on piles of cash over at most universities out there. So it sounds like the $20 million being split is a big time topic of conversation. I know the Big 12 is kicking around ideas that we'll absolutely get into throughout this week. I'm sure the SEC, the Big 10, and the ACC are doing the exact same right now. The question is, what does that look like? And it's not necessarily only a question for college football, it's a question for all college sports, but let's just focus on college football for right this second, because it'll be fascinating to see how it impacts college football. I think a lot of this, when you keep collectives in on the party, when you possibly have them in the conversation for years to come, I don't necessarily think you have to go drastically in one direction, drastically to football, and give 10 million of the 20 million to all football players. I think you can distribute it more evenly, but that being said, you also want to keep that competitive advantage. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. That will be a huge defining moment, not only for college football, but probably more importantly for other college sports around some maybe smaller schools that don't have that 20 million to just throw around willy-nilly. And then we have roster and scholarship counts that are going to be fascinating to watch. If there is a roster cap put in place for college football, the idea has been put around for 85 kids, which is the scholarship number right now, or 100 kids. So if that does happen, it'll change the nature of the sport. There's no two ways about that. There will be no walk-ons essentially across this entire sport. Everyone will be on scholarship, and there will be less roster positions at the Georgias and the Bamas and the Texas of the world. And there will be more at the South Floridas and maybe the Troys and maybe the App States of the world. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. I think it's one of those things that I fully understand why coaches are upset about that. They don't necessarily want to lose that practice squad, that scout team that they love so much and helps them prepare for so many different games. But the reality is, you got to help out some smaller schools where you can. I think that's a great way to do it. And then also, how is the transfer portal and NIL going to be handled in the future? That's likely what most of the fans care about the most. I think that's something that a lot of people are pretty upset about right about now, and I think there's a number of reasons to be upset about it, and we'll find out what the solution for it is going forward. Obviously, contracts have been discussed, employment has been discussed, and likely that would involve players having to stick around for 2, 3, 4 years depending on the contract. So that'll be fascinating to watch. Definitely something that will define the sport. But on top of that, we have a little bit of conference realignment. It feels like we're never going to get rid of conference realignment, frankly, but Florida State, Clemson are out of the ACC. I feel pretty confident in that. Obviously, no paperwork has been signed. They're still going through that legal procedure, but the second they made those claims, the second they started arguing at the ACC and Florida State changing their argument about 10 different times to make sure they can get out, I think that's all the indication we need of where they stand with the ACC. They want out, and they're going to find their way out. Utah might find their way in from the Big 12, which is a huge topic of conversation. In fact, the Utah just released a statement yesterday saying they are very happy in the Big 12. But I think, as we all know, you can say some things out loud, and then behind closed doors, you're doing some other things. So it'll be interesting to see that unfold. I think Utah is a huge domino in all of this because they are a huge program in college football, and they're someone that I think a lot of us were expecting to be the class of the Big 12 going forward. Well, maybe they're the class of the ACC going forward. So that'll be really interesting. And then, as we talked about earlier, the leadership. Who is going to be that person that's out in front of this sport? And it's kind of hard to figure out who it's going to be. Frankly, I know we're all pointing towards the SEC and the Big 10, and they have all of the power in the world. And it could be them. There's no doubt about that. It could just be an entirely new governing body instead of the NCAA. It could be them breaking off as their own entity and becoming a totally different thing. So the future of that is going to be very precarious. I think the two guys that probably have the most power over that, probably are the ones that I would circle the most to take over the sport, quote unquote, take over the sport, is Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti. They are the commissioners of the biggest conferences in the country. They are some of the most powerful people in the sport, and if something was going to happen with college athletics, like college football breaking off, or like the SEC and the Big Ten breaking off into their own entity, those are the two guys that would make it happen. So it'll be fascinating to watch this. I think there's so many things to love about this sport, and a lot of those things are not going away. I know it feels like the future of the sport is very uncertain and has pretty much no guarantees, but there's a couple of guarantees for the future of the sport, which is we're going to have football, and we're going to have some of the matchups that we all love. Obviously, conference realignment is a crazy thing, but we're still going to get Georgia-Florida for the foreseeable future. We're still going to get Georgia-Auburn. We're still going to get Texas-Oklahoma. We're still going to get Texas A&M. There's still those games. Ohio State, Michigan. All of these games are still alive, and the atmospheres in those stadiums are still alive. Jump around at halftime at Wisconsin, and Ralphie the Buffalo running out onto the field at Colorado. All of those things still exist, and I understand that there's a million different things going on around the sport that make it not as fun to talk about, not as fun to watch. All of those things I fully understand, and I agree with all of that sentiment, to be totally honest with you. I do agree that it makes it more frustrating. I do agree that most of this offseason, I wish that I was talking about football instead of talking about court cases and revenue sharing and everything in between. But we're at this point for a reason. And I think we got to this point because there was a long time in college football and college sports in general where these athletes were frankly being taken advantage of. And they were bringing in a lot of money for a school that was giving them essentially nothing back. I understand scholarships are great and all, but that is not the dollar amount that they are worth. I can promise you that. So this was all necessary. The house settlement, all of this stuff that is going on is something that probably needed to happen. Now, there could be a lot of things that happen in the future that don't need to happen, and we'll have to kind of take that we'll take that in stride and try to figure out what the best way forward is. But this is going to be the time that we all remember. This is going to be the time that we say college football was defined in the last, 20 years because of these couple of months, because of this next year. And we'll have to be careful about, who we choose to usher us into this new era. We'll have to be careful about the way that we go into this new era. But what I will say with absolute confidence, with no question, I can't say a lot of things with absolute confidence in this sport, but one thing I absolutely can is this sport is still going to be special. It's still going to have the parts of the sport that you love the most and the parts that you really care about the most, which is having your team on the field against a team that you hate for reasons that you don't fully understand, that go beyond you and beyond anything that you could possibly imagine. You're still going to have those atmospheres. You're still going to have the fans. You're still going to have all the stuff you love. So I'm just excited to get there. I'm excited to get to the place where everything just kind of sits for a second and we're in stable waters and we don't have to worry about all this stuff. But it's going to take time to get there. And there's going to have to be some things that happen that might not make you super happy to get there. And it's going to be a bumpy road, but I promise once we get on the other side, we're still going to have college football, and it's still going to be a beautiful sport, and it's still going to have probably 99% of the things that you love the most about it. So that's kind of my little testimony. I know that was a little bit long-winded and definitely something that I felt like just needed to be said at this point in time. So it's going to be a very interesting year. I'm going to be right there with you following everything, but I think we're going to be okay. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame list for the college football. There is so many good names on this list that are newcomers to it, but also some of the past guys that honestly probably deserve to be in before this, but are still on that list. We'll break down everything that you need to know right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the changes that are going on in college football and how a lot of them are necessary, a lot of them are going to get us to a place that we all hope to get to, but it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road to get there. But let's start to break down this Hall of Fame class in 2025. We have a ton of new faces that are up for Hall of Fame status this upcoming year, and there are a lot of really, really good ones. So let's start to break this down because it is going to be a fascinating class. Let's start with Kenyon Barner. I think a lot of you likely remember him from his Oregon days. He was actually one of the first jerseys I've ever owned as a college football fan. So definitely has a special place in my heart. Someone that I love a lot, was an absolute burner when he was at Oregon, so a huge player. I'll be totally honest, I did not see all of these players play, to be totally fair, so I can't necessarily speak on them as much as I would like, but I did as much research as I could to get a good idea of who all these guys are. I mean, Aaron Donald speaks for itself. One of the best defensive players of all time. Frankly, the best that I've ever seen. He did incredible things at the NFL, but it started at Pitt, where he was just an absolute force for those 4 years. He was at Pitt and just an absolute dominant player. And Alex Faneka is another remarkable player from LSU, was an All-American while he was there, was a huge piece for that LSU program while he was on that campus. John Henderson, one of the most dominant defensive tackles in the entire SEC history, someone that absolutely was a huge part of those Tennessee days that a lot of Tennessee fans remember and want to go back to as quickly as possible and feel like they might just be going back to right now. You also have Mark Ingram, the very first Heisman winner for Alabama. That's a huge thing. And when you talk about Alabama, you're talking about college football. So I think he's going to be someone that might be a little bit hard to keep out. Deshaun Jackson right there, coming from Cal. Obviously, I remember him a little bit more from his NFL career, but the dude was electric from pretty much day one. So he's definitely an absolute beast. Alex Mack had a fantastic NFL career, but also was incredible for Cal right around that same time when him and Deshaun were teammates. Tons of really, really good names on here. Sean Taylor, RIP, one of the best, hardest hitting safeties that you have ever seen. Guy just flew downhill, and someone that definitely will find his way into the Hall of Fame at some point, whether it's this year or down the road. Steve Slayton is someone that you might not remember too well, but was a huge, huge piece of that West Virginia 07 run that was one of the best non-national champions we've seen in quite some time. And this guy was a huge piece of that, was an absolute beast. And then Manti Te'o, one of the most remarkable defensive players I've seen in my lifetime, was a Heisman finalist, did some just ridiculous things while at Notre Dame. Just an absolute incredible player. And then the last two guys on that list, Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, the two guys that likely define this list more than anyone else. Nick Saban, we knew was going to be here. Urban Meyer, I think they were likely just waiting to make sure that he was not getting back into coaching, because that was still a little bit up in the air from time to time throughout the last couple of years. But I think he's set over there at Fox. I think he's plenty happy, and I think he's probably out of college football for good going forward. But obviously, this is a remarkable group. Sean Taylor, Manti Te'o, Aaron Donald, Mark Ingram, and all of the other players on this list are absolutely elite. I'll be totally honest, I don't know how anyone makes Hall of Fame decisions, because when you look at all of these guys' stats, it's just absurd what they were able to accomplish when they were in college football, and it's going to be interesting to see who makes this list. I'll give 5 picks of my own later on, but spoiler alert, Urban Meyer and Nick Saban are going to get in. There's no two ways about that. Nick Saban being the best coach that college football has ever seen. 7 national titles. He went 292, 71, and 1 over 28 seasons. So an absolute dominating force. I think we all understand that he was going to be in the Hall of Fame as quickly as possible. Frankly, they could have inducted him while he was still a head coach, but that's just the reality of this situation. And then Urban Meyer, third highest winning percentage of all time, won 219 games, 3 national titles, so yeah, he's going to be there as well. There's no two ways about that. So 2 of the best coaches that I've ever seen, absolutely, but 2 of the best coaches the sport has ever seen, and they will be making their way into the Hall of Fame. There's no two ways about that. But I have a problem with this list, and I think it's the problem that pretty much everyone else in college football has, and I'm sure some of you might have while looking at this list. There's no Mike Leach on here. And that's absolutely insane. There's no two ways about that. I don't understand how it's taken remotely this long to get him on that list and get him in the Hall of Fame. He is one of the pioneers of the new way that we play this sport. He was one of the guys that took what Hal Mumme started way back in the day and made it mainstream. Those Texas Tech teams were as defining to college football as many other teams in history. He totally changed the dynamic of you're going to pass the ball, and you're going to continue to pass the ball, and you're going to pass the ball some more, and it's going to be really, really incredible. So it's one of those things where Mike Leach was an absolute staple of this sport, and he's someone that he defined the way that we play, he defined the way that college football is coached, and he's also one of the best personalities we've ever seen in this sport, and the fact that he's not even up for conversation in the Hall of Fame is beyond stupid. So hopefully they figure that out. Hopefully fans make a big enough fuss that he gets in there. But man, that is a huge omission, and there's really no other way to argue that he shouldn't be in there. But let's get to the guys that are actually on this list. Let's get to the 5 picks that I have that I think will make the Hall of Fame in their first year. And it starts with a guy that I think we all understand. Aaron Donald was an absolute force at Pitt, did some really remarkable things, was an All-American selection, won ACC Defensive Player of the Year as a senior, did some just incredible things. And frankly, although it is the College Football Hall of Fame, I don't think it hurts at all that he had the NFL career that he had. So I think this is a slam dunk. I think he's absolutely going to be in, and someone that likely should be in for the way that he was just an absolute dominant force when he was at Pitt. Then you got John Henderson, a guy that, frankly, I didn't get the pleasure of watching live, but everything that I've seen has just been absolutely remarkable. Was a 2-time All-SEC recipient, 162 total tackles, 20 and a half sacks at defensive tackle throughout a career is absolutely insane. Frankly, he went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, played 10 seasons in the NFL, 2-time Pro Bowler, did just incredible things on the football field, but it all started at Tennessee, and he was a force, someone that absolutely is one of the best defensive tackles in SEC history, Tennessee history, and college football history, frankly. So definitely should be making the list this time around. Mark Ingram, we talked about it earlier. When you are the first Heisman winner for a program like Alabama, you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. He did just remarkable things while there, won a national title, obviously, in 2009, the year that he won that Heisman, did some really remarkable things, ran for over 1,600 yards, scored 20 touchdowns that year, was a unanimous All-American in 2009, and went on to be a 3-time 1,000-yard rusher in the NFL. So he was no slouch at the next level either. Definitely a guy that absolutely should be on this list because he was kind of one of the pioneers of the Nick Saban era at Alabama, and it's one of the most defining eras of college football history. So Mark Ingram, I fully expect to be in this list. And then Sean Taylor, one of the best pure football players that has probably ever played the sport. Left us far too soon and definitely would have been probably much, much higher on a lot of lists that he really should be on. One of the most remarkable players that a lot of us have ever seen, was a unanimous first-team All-American in 2003, was a finalist for the Thorpe Award, did just incredible things, and is one of those guys that if you want to convince someone to love football, you turn on his highlight tape and just show him just tearing into people, and it just makes it for really, really fun TV, and definitely a guy that I think all of us look back on very, very fondly. So someone that I really, really hope makes it, someone that definitely defined a era of college football down in Coral Gables that will live on for an eternity, and he is a huge piece of that. And then Alan Faneka is a fantastic offensive guard from LSU. Did not play during my lifetime, unfortunately, but definitely was a remarkable player for LSU. Had a first-team All-Pro when he was in the NFL. When he was at LSU, he was an All-American in '97. Did some really, really remarkable things. Won the SEC blocking trophy, All-Conference 2 years in a row. So just did remarkable things at LSU. And definitely when you're one of the best players at a program like LSU, you're going to find your way into the Hall of Fame. So it's a lot of really good names on this list. There's no two ways about that. I think it's going to be incredibly hard to break down this list and figure out who you want to let in. Obviously, there's no necessarily cap on who you want to let in. If I was voting, I'd probably give a vote to Kenyon Barner just because I love him that much back in the day. But there's also Ken Dorsey still out there. Garrison Hurst hasn't made it in, which is out of this world insane, but there's still some really remarkable players that still need to find their way in. So although this is a remarkable first year class, they might have to wait a little bit for some of the guys that probably should have been in earlier to find their way in. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my all-transfer team. It was a remarkable year for the transfer portal, and I want to break down my offense for this year. I think there's a ton of guys to choose from, but I feel like I got a pretty good team on my hands. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Hall of Fame inductees and some of the people that are up for the first time, and definitely some really, really good names on that list. Mark Ingram, Aaron Donald, Sean Taylor, some of the really remarkable players in college football history are up for probably the biggest honor in college football, getting into the Hall of Fame. But let's get into an all-transfer team. I'm going to do the offense today. Likely we'll do the defense tomorrow, but the offense is absolutely loaded. No secret there. It's been a crazy, crazy year for the transfer portal, but I really like my team, and I think they would really rival any team in the entire country, frankly. But let's start to break this down, and let's start with the quarterback. I'm going Dillon Gabriel. I understand that there likely is some other more talented guys out there. I would say Julian Sayin might have a better career. I think Cam Ward might have a better year this upcoming in 2024. But I feel very comfortable with Dillon Gabriel. I think he's one of those guys that when you trot him out on that field, you know you're going to get good football. You don't necessarily know if you're going to get, out of this world. He's going to light the world on fire, but he's someone that can absolutely execute a game plan and do it at a very, very high level. So I think when you're talking about transfers this last year, when you're talking about guys that are going to have a huge impact on the team, Dillon Gabriel is likely at the very top of that list. So I went with him at the quarterback position. For running backs, I gave you 2. I actually have 12 players on this list, but I couldn't help myself with wide receivers adding another one in there. But for running backs, I have the 2 guys that are 2 of the best running backs in the entire country, Quinshon Judkins and Damian Martinez. Judkins is one of the guys that I think everyone is watching going into this season. A lot are pegging him to be the Doak Walker Award winner. I've said on here before, I think Travion Henderson might be the better running back, but that's an argument for another day, I suppose. I do think this guy is absolutely insane, though, and I think when you put him next to a guy like Chip Kelly, who gets running backs a lot of space to work. We just talked about Kenyon Barner. That is one of the guys that absolutely benefited from being under Chip Kelly, and Quinshon Judkins could do the exact same. He's someone that could top 1,000 yards, could do just remarkable things, and be one of the top running backs off the board, if not the top running back off the board in the 2025 draft. And then you have Damian Martinez, one of the most dynamic players in the country. He made his way over in the spring portal from Oregon State to Miami, and it was an absolutely huge pickup for the Hurricanes. They had Mark Fletcher there, but you likely need one more back to just kind of make that a little bit more potent of an attack. And Damian Martinez is an absolutely fantastic back to choose from. I think he's one of those guys where you look across the college football landscape and there's tons of transfers that can kind of transform a conference, a team, the entirety of college football, but Damian Martinez might be towards the top of that list if you're not talking about quarterbacks, of course, because Miami needed the run game. They needed a change of pace. They needed someone to take a little bit of pressure off Mark Fletcher and off of Cam Ward, and Damian Martinez is the perfect person to do that. So I think he's one of those guys that could win the Doak Walker Award, and if he does do that, then Miami's going to have a lot to say about the college football playoff, about the ACC this upcoming season. And then you have Isaiah Bond. Texas was looking for a replacement for Xavier Worthy. There's no two ways about that. They needed someone that was going to be a speedster on the outside, that was going to help them fill that massive void that was left not only by Worthy, but by A.D. Mitchell, by Jordan Whittington, by Jatavian Sanders. And this is a perfect person to fill that, specifically the Xavier Worthy void. He's someone that was absolutely incredible for Bama, obviously caught that kind of Hail Mary sort of against Auburn and the closing seconds there to give Bama the win, was the reception leader for the Tide a year ago, and Texas had a remarkable wide receiver class, especially in the transfer portal. Added Silas Bolden over from Oregon State, also Matthew Golden from Houston, two very, very good players that absolutely are going to have a ton to do with what Texas does this upcoming season, but Isaiah Bond is really where it all starts, and definitely a guy that could be the wide receiver 3 in this upcoming class. I think we all understand that when you look at this wide receiver class in the 2025 draft, it's Luther Burden, it's Satori McMillan, and then it's kind of open season. And I think Isaiah Bond's one of those guys that could make his way into that wide receiver 3 spot. And then you have Evan Stewart down there at Oregon. He's someone that is just one of my favorite offensive transfers all year, if I'm being totally honest. I think he's one of those guys that you put him in the right system, and Will Stein has the right system for him. He can be an absolute beast, and I think he showed that in flashes at A&M, but I think if you really unleash this kid, he's going to do some things that are going to make some people's jaw drop. I think he might just be their number one receiver. I understand Tez Johnson has been there and is going to be a huge part of that offense, but I think Evan Stewart just has that next level, I suppose, that he can tap into, and I think he's going to be a absolutely huge player for the Ducks this upcoming season. I think Dylan Gabriel and him might just have one of the best duos in the entire country. And then my extra wide receiver here is Noah Rogers. This one's a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit more than the other two, but this guy can outright play. He did not play too much at Ohio State because when you go into that Ohio State wide receiver room, you better be a 5-star number 1 player in the country if you want to play right away, like Jeremiah Smith is this upcoming year. But this guy is going to be an absolute beast for the Wolfpack. I feel really, really confident in that. I think he's someone that I really think he's going to be their wide receiver 1. I think Kevin Concepcion is a fantastic player, but I think if you're going to use him the way that he's probably most effective, you don't necessarily feed the ball to him every single down. You get him in space in different times and let him just be the special player he is. Now that you have Noah Rogers, you have that ability. You can open that up a little bit more, and I think Noah Rogers is going to be a huge player in the ACC and for the Wolfpack in general. But let's get into tight end, and Ben Urasek is where I'm looking. He made his way over to Georgia, and imagine that. A perfect player for an absolutely perfect spot, someone that is going to do incredible things. He was really, really good when he was at Stanford, and now that he's going to a place that just, thrives on putting tight ends into the NFL, he's going to do incredible things. And especially, I think, putting him next to Oscar Delp really opens things up for him. I think Oscar Delp is such a dominant blocker, such a guy that you're going to be worried about in the run game, that Ben Urasek can sneak right behind lines and do those seam routes, do overball routes, whatever it looks like, and just get tons of catches and really, really dominate defenses. So when you're focused on Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas and London Humphreys and all of the wide receivers that Georgia has, Ben Urasek's just going to be running up the middle of the field and dominate you the other way. So it's going to be remarkable to watch this kid play. I think he's going to be one of the best tight ends in the entire country, right after Mitchell Evans, right after Colston Loveland. This is a guy that I would have right up there. And then the offensive line, this was a tough group to put together because there's some guys that aren't quite as proven, some guys that I wanted to give proper credit to because they are proven. So let's start with Caden Green. He is going into his sophomore year, transferred from Oklahoma to Missouri. And I think this guy is one of the biggest transfers in the country. Missouri absolutely needed some help in that offensive line, and they got one of the best tackles in the country. I think he's one of those guys that we always talk about, Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell, and they're remarkable players that are absolutely going to be high draft picks this next year. I think Caden Green's right after him. I think he's the guy that likely will be getting a lot of talk in the top 10 of the 2026 draft, and definitely will be someone that Missouri's going to need to play really good football, and he is no stranger to playing really good football, that's for sure. Jason Zandamela is a guy that is an uber-talented young player. Did not play any college football to this point, transferred from USC after just being there for the spring, but he's going to be a big player for multiple years for Florida. I don't necessarily know if he starts this year because Florida honestly has a relatively good offensive line over there, but the talent, I mean, he absolutely could make that list. He's someone that does really, really incredible things, is an absolute athlete, and I think he's going to be a force down there in Gainesville for quite some time to come. Parker Brailsford is going to be the linchpin for this Alabama team, just this same way he was the linchpin for the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line over at Washington the past year. So he's someone that's going to be absolutely huge. It took a little bit longer to get him on campus in practice than people imagined, but James Brockermeyer found his way to TCU, so that center position is wide open, and it's going to be Parker Brailsford, and he's going to absolutely dominate, if you were to ask me. And then I have Branson Hickman here. I think this is absolutely huge. I think when you talk about positions of need at big-time programs, it starts with Oklahoma and O-line. They have a big-time hole at that position. Now, Branson Hickman doesn't fix that altogether, but when you get an all-AAC offensive lineman, when you get a guy that can absolutely play really good football, it doesn't hurt anything, that's for sure. I definitely think he's going to be a huge player for them, and he's going to have to hit because this offensive line right now looks a lot like patchwork, but Branson Hickman is a very, very solid building block to build around. And then you have Lance Hurd, another guy that is a very talented young kid that absolutely, when he was coming out of high school, could have played D-line and he could have played O-line. He is one of those really special athletes that can do literally anything on the football field, but I think he's going to be the left tackle for the Tennessee Vols this upcoming year, and he's going to be an absolute beast. He is a force. His measurables are just out of this world. It doesn't even seem human, frankly, and I think he's going to be huge for Tennessee because if you keep Nico Iamaleava up, then he's going to be okay. He's going to be a guy that can pick apart defenses, but if Lance Hurd isn't quite the player that we expect him to be, it could be a long year for Nico, so it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. I think when you look at this transfer class, there are so many remarkable players all across it, and especially on the offensive side of the ball. Texas brought in tons of really good wide receivers. Running backs were all over the place this past transfer portal cycle, and there were some really, really good players all across the offense. So it was not an easy list to nail down, that's for sure, but we'll do defense tomorrow to give you guys an idea of who is leading the way there. Caleb Downs will be in that team. I can say that right now. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my Group of 5 playoff contenders. There are tons of teams that can make some noise from the Group of 5 because they have a guaranteed spot, but there are some teams that I'm circling right now that might be above the pack just a little bit. So we'll get to that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into my all-transfer team. We did the offensive side of the ball today. Tomorrow we'll do the defensive, but let's get into my Group of 5 playoff contenders because there's a lot of them. The Group of 5 has been guaranteed a playoff spot going forward. The top 5 conference champions are automatically in, and that would include one of these Group of 5 teams. Most likely, almost definitely would include one of these Group of 5 teams. And I want to break down some of the teams that I'm watching very, very closely going into this year. And let's start with a team that I think might be a little bit under the radar. I don't know if they are anymore, frankly, and it's the Memphis Tigers. I think they can do just remarkable things in the AAC this year. Bringing back Seth Hannigan when I'm sure there were a lot of programs that were after him is absolutely huge. Memphis has an opening to be a team that can insert themselves into that playoff conversation the first time that the group of five has a automatic spot. Obviously, Cincinnati was able to kick down the door in 2021, but definitely a bigger opening this time around. They also brought in some big-time transfers. Mario Anderson coming in from South Carolina at running back is absolutely huge. A really, really good player there. Elijah Herring, the leading tackler for Tennessee a year ago, came in. Kobe Minor was one of the biggest players in the portal at safety from Indiana, so they got some game changers. There's no two ways about that, and they definitely have a talent level that a lot of people around college football, or around at least the group of five, envy a ton. So the AAC feels like the conference that is going to get the team in. It feels like the conference that we're going to see the conference champion find their way into the playoff, but who knows? Regardless, Memphis is going to be one of those teams that is in the thick of that conversation. I think they're coming off a 10-win season. They lead the way in odds to make the playoff for the G5 at plus 600. So they're a team that absolutely will have a ton to say about what that playoff team is going to be from the group of five. And I'm just fascinated to watch the Tigers this upcoming year. And then we have Boise State, a team that was a part of the national conversation for quite some time, has taken a little bit of a step back since Chris Peterson walked out the door, but is still a huge team and definitely brought in a big-time transfer in Malachi Nelson. Did not need to bring in a ton else. They're not replacing a ton of people from the team a year ago, and the biggest person that they're returning is Ashton Jainty, one of the best running backs in the entire country. He could play anywhere in the entire country and maybe start for anywhere in the entire country, but he's in Boise, and they're absolutely happy to have him there, happy that he is a Bronco, and he could win the Doak Walker Award. That's how dominant this kid could be in the Mountain West this upcoming year, and he would be a massive reason if the Broncos found their way into the playoff this upcoming year. So Boise State is one of those teams that we tend to see a lot of in college football world, but I think we might just be seeing a ton of them going forward in the playoff because they're one of those teams that is going to play really good football pretty much every fall. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. One of the teams from last year that made tons of noise was Liberty, and it's because of the guy on your screen right there, Caden Salter. He is one of the most electric quarterbacks, one of the most electric players in all of college football. He can do just ridiculous things. He flirted with the transfer portal but decided to come back to Liberty, and they're very, very happy he did because he is pretty much the guy that holds the key. I think Liberty has a ton rolling under Jamie Chadwell. It started obviously under Hugh Freeze, but has continued, and it really is a team that I think is going to be hard to deal with for a really, really long time to come, and I think Caden Salter is one of those guys that totally transforms your team the second he steps on the field. When you talk about the playoff this upcoming year, I think a lot of people are looking forward to Cinderellas and some teams possibly from the group of five making runs. Frankly, I don't necessarily think that's what's going to happen. Maybe we'll do a segment on that a little bit later in the week, but if there was a team in the group of five that could make a run, I think it might be Liberty just because Caden Salter is a guy that can compete with essentially any defense in the entire country. So very fascinated to watch Liberty this upcoming year. I think they might just be a team that can not only get into the playoff, but maybe make some noise once they're there. Tulane is a team that I'm watching very, very closely. There were tons of turnover there. There's no two ways about that. Willie Fritz found his way out to Houston. John Summerall found his way in. Michael Pratt went off to the NFL at quarterback. They brought in Ty Thompson from Oregon. So a lot of change over there in New Orleans, but the reality is this is going to be a really good team. There's going to be a ton of teams in the AAC that have a lot to say about that playoff spot, but Tulane is absolutely going to be one of them. Their transfer portal class is frankly one of the best in the entire country. When you look at where they are and the players that they got, it's absolutely insane. They brought in Mario Williams from USC, who is an absolute force for Oklahoma, then USC, and is now at Tulane. And then Shaz Preston, a guy that didn't necessarily play too much at Alabama when he was there, but was a four-star wide receiver coming out. Tons of big-time teams were after this kid, and he can absolutely fly. So I think between Ty Thompson, between Mario Williams, Shaz Preston, I think you have a ton of dudes that are going to make big-time plays and a ton of guys that are just a tick above some of the ability and some of the talent level at the group of 5 level. So when you look at Tulane this upcoming year, I think they're going to be a team that is really, really fascinating to watch. And I think Ty Thompson is one of the most interesting players in the country this upcoming year. And then I got to give some love to South Florida. They are a team that has absolutely blown up under Alex Golesh, and he deserves the most respect in the world. Byron Brown is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the entire country. Naquan Wright is a very, very good running back right next to him, a very prominent duo in that backfield. You had Abdul Raham Yassin, who transferred in from Purdue at wide receiver. Also Sean Atkins, who is a very, very sure-handed, very good wide receiver for them that is a veteran. I think when you put all of this together, they're coming off a season where they made a huge jump record-wise from 2022 to 2023. It could happen again. This is a team that is only trending in the right direction. Alex Golesh is a huge reason for that. Frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if he wasn't a Power 5 coach this time next year. But the reality is this is a team that can absolutely make some noise, be a team that makes their way into the playoff. And if they do, it is one of the best rebuilds that you have ever seen in college football. Alex Golesh has done one of the most remarkable things that we have ever seen if that happens. So definitely will be a fascinating team to watch. And then I threw kind of a wild card in here. There are some other teams that deserve some respect. App State definitely in this conversation, but UNLV is a team that I really want everyone to watch very closely because they made a Mountain West Championship appearance a year ago. Didn't come out on the right side of that, obviously, but still is a team that can do remarkable things. Absolutely has one of the best players in the country in Ricky White. Did incredible things for them a year ago, and somehow they were able to keep him in Las Vegas. So he's going to do incredible things this year. Matthew Sluka coming in from Holy Cross is a huge pickup at quarterback. He's kind of that Jaden Mayava type quarterback where he's not necessarily going to beat you with his arm. He's not the most potent passer in the entire world, but is a very, very good runner and is a competent passer. So he's going to open up a lot of running lanes. And when you see that offense for UNLV, it's really, really hard to defend, especially when that quarterback can get out on the edge and make you hurt with his legs. So Matthew Sluka is one of the most important quarterbacks in the entire country when you talk about UNLV has a chance to make it to keep taking those steps forward, make it to the playoff, and maybe make some noise. So I absolutely love the Running Rebels. They returned 63% of their production from a year ago without their quarterback. So that's obviously a huge boost. I think if Matthew Sluka comes in and absolutely deals the way he did at Holy Cross, I think they could be a really, really fun team to watch and maybe, just maybe, make the playoff under Barry Odom. So fascinating team, definitely a team that I love a lot, will be one of the teams that I started Dynasty with in College Football 25, that's for sure. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. I think when you look at the group of 5, there's more names to go around than ever before because there's a position there that is absolutely guaranteed, and everyone in the group of 5 is looking at that saying, we have a shot to get in. I think in the past they were questioning, are we going to get in? Do we really have a shot to get in? Or are we going to get squeezed out no matter what we do? Because that's kind of happened in the past. We saw it happen with UCF in 2017 where they went undefeated and still got squeezed out. And it really took kind of a rough year in 2021 for some big-time teams for Cincinnati to get in. But those times are gone. Group of 5 is guaranteed a spot, and it'll be fascinating to watch who fills that spot and maybe if they can make some noise once they get there. It'll be very, very fascinating to watch. But let's make our last break here, and then when we get back, we're going to talk about a Top 10 Tuesday. I'm going to give you the best games in 2024. Obviously, these are not necessarily the most important game, not necessarily the most impactful games, but these are the games that I am probably most excited to watch, may be the best way to put this. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the group of 5 teams that might just be making their way into the playoff this upcoming year. Definitely a lot of teams to watch, whether you want to watch Liberty or South Florida, a team that is really rising under Alex Golesh. So that'll be fascinating to watch, but let's get into the best games of 2024. This is going to be a crazy year. There are so many incredible games, some new games that we haven't had in the past, some conference games that are going to be really interesting to watch as conference games coming up, and it's just going to be incredible. And a little bit of a spoiler alert before we start here, a lot of these games are going to be Big Ten or SEC games. Just fair warning, that's just kind of the way of the world right now. But let's start at number 10, and let's start with a game that maybe some people are overlooking a little bit, but I'm fascinated to see what happens. Missouri at Alabama on October 26th. This is a game that I think everyone just assumes Alabama's going to win because of the past almost. It's a game that I think when you look at Alabama this upcoming season, there are question marks. You don't really know how Kalen DeBoer is going to take the helm now. By August 26th, October 26th, we'll likely know what he's going to look like. We'll likely know what his, at least what this team is going to look like that year. But Missouri could be coming to town with a lot on their plate, a huge motivation where when you come into Alabama, there's always that chance that you make history. Every single team that has walked into that stadium over the last 10 years has felt that energy. And it was the same thing that happened with Texas a year ago where they made history. They were the first team to beat Bama under Saban by double digits at home. So just absolutely incredible that, that place has had that many people walk out with L's over the last decade. And Missouri's a team with as much motivation, as much energy going into this season as really anyone in the country. And I think when you talk about most programs, ascending to the top of the sport or getting to a place where they want to be, where Missouri wants to be under Eli Drinkwitz, you need that moment, right? You need that big time game that gets everyone's attention, that makes sure everyone notices your team. And this might just be it for Missouri. I think it's going to be really tough, obviously, to win this game, but I'm fascinated to see what happens because this might just be a coronation for Missouri in the future of college football going forward. And then I got Ole Miss at LSU on October 12th. I think this game is going to be fascinating. When you look at the SEC this upcoming year, Georgia's got to play at Alabama. They got to go to Texas. They got to play some games that they haven't necessarily had to play in the past. And some other teams are going to have to play some tougher games where these might be a game that decides the other team in Atlanta, frankly, because there are a lot of hurdles for some of the big-time teams in this conference, whether it's Texas, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Alabama. It would be a little bit hard for multiple of those teams to make the dance, and I think there's going to be one of these wildcard teams, whether it's Ole Miss or LSU or Texas A&M or someone that makes their way into Atlanta at the end of the year, and this might just be the game that decides it, at least for these two. So that'll be fascinating to watch. I think this game is just going to be so much fun, if I'm being totally honest. And honestly, probably not too much defense like we saw last year, if I'm being totally honest. But Florida State at Notre Dame on November 9th is a fascinating game to me because it's not a conference game. It's not necessarily the most important game in the world for the playoff because if Florida State takes care of business in the ACC and they win that conference, they're in. That's no problem. But I think this one is weirdly a game that both these teams need, especially Notre Dame in particular, because you need those resume builders where you can get them in a schedule that is not nearly as strong as the past couple of years for Notre Dame. But Florida State is a team that needs confidence, and they don't need necessarily confidence that they can beat ACC teams. They need confidence that they can beat everyone. And I think this is a game where they can show everyone that they're not just here to, dominate the ACC. They're not just here to stick around for a couple of years and then fade back off into the oblivion. They're going to be a really good team for a long time to come. And I think at Notre Dame is probably the best place to prove that to everyone. So it'll be fascinating to watch that game. Oregon at Michigan, obviously, as you can see from the jerseys, not a game we've seen very recently, but this is going to be fascinating to watch. I think very opposing styles, but kind of the same approach, weirdly enough. They're both very hard-nosed teams. They both kind of have that culture where you're not going to take shortcuts, and you're going to do the hard things that no one else is willing to do in a lot of ways. So a lot of these, teams have similar cultures, but different ways they go about business on the field. And I think this is going to be one of those games when you talk about all of the transfers that came in from Oregon compared to all the people that walked out for Michigan. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how either of these teams kind of adapt to their new places in this conference possibly. So it'll be fascinating to watch that game. Obviously, all these new games are going to be really interesting, but this might be the one that really, really defines the Big Ten in a large way this upcoming season. And then I had Georgia at Ole Miss on November 9th. Ole Miss is getting a ton of hype, and this would be the moment to prove a lot of people right and prove some people wrong. So when you look at Ole Miss, last year even when they played Georgia, it was domination, and that's just kind of the way of things when they've played these big-time teams over the past couple of years. But this feels like the year where a lot of things can change, and if they can pull that off, if they can do the things that Lane Kiffin and a lot of people in that building believe that they can do, this might be the game where they really take that full step into national conversation, into possibly national championship conversation, because when you beat a team like Georgia, you're going to be in those conversations. That's just the way of things at this point. So this is a fascinating game because it could be kind of a defining moment for Ole Miss, the same way Missouri at Bama might be for Missouri. I think this could be the same type of deal. So it'll be fascinating to watch that game. This is one of the best out-of-conference matchups in the entire slate. I think when you look at Texas at Michigan on September 7th, there's so much to look forward to. This is a rematch of the 2005 Rose Bowl where the kind of legend of Vince Young over that, year and a half was really started. He did incredible things in that game and did incredible things throughout the 2004 season, but that was really when, the legend of Vince Young really, really started, and Texas won that game on a last-second field goal, so there will be Michigan fans that are very, very excited about this game. I think it's one of those that you're going to get a good idea for what these two teams are, what the season is going to look like for these two teams in this game, because it's going to be really, really interesting styles. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Can Texas keep up physically with what's going to be a really good offensive line and a really good defensive line for Michigan? Can Michigan keep up with all the wide receivers and all the talent on the outside that Texas is going to have? So it's going to be fascinating to watch two big brands in one of the best stadiums in the country. It always makes for good football. There's no two ways about that. But this one at 4 makes me a little bit upset. I felt a little bit icky putting it here, if I'm being totally honest, but it gives you an idea of just how good the top 3 are going to be. But Michigan at Ohio State on November 30th is always going to be one of the best games of the year. It's always going to be appointment television for the foreseeable future. Unless Michigan absolutely falls off a cliff or Ohio State the same, you're going to want to tune into this game at noon on that Saturday. So it's going to be fascinating to watch how both these teams develop before this game. But once you get into it, I think we all understand you throw out everything that you thought you knew about these teams. They're going to play a different level of football. They're going to play with more aggression, and whichever team comes out on top, it's going to be very, very interesting. Ohio State obviously probably needs this game a little bit more than Michigan does, but Michigan's going to be coming in with as much motivation as really anyone in the country for any game in the country. So that one's always a really fun. Excuse me. That one's always a really fun one. But the top 3 here are just insane. Georgia at Bama on September 28th is just out of this world insane. This rivalry is still alive and well. I promise you. These two teams, these two fan bases, still really don't like each other. I'll put that way. I think this one is going to be really, really interesting because it could be kind of a changing of the guard in the SEC. Alabama has been the thorn in Georgia's side for quite some time, and they did get one over on them in 2022 or 2021, won that national title, but that was really about it when you were talking about Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide over the past couple of years. This is the game that they could, walk into their building, beat them, and say, this is our conference now. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that. I think that's a game where everyone's looking forward to it, not only because of the two teams that are coming in, but because of the hate that exists between those two teams. But let's get into the top 2. Ohio State at Oregon is going to be fascinating. October 12th, I think this game might be the defining game in the Big 12 this upcoming year. When you talk about the Big 10, when you talk about the Big 10 going into this year, these are the two teams that start the conversation. Now, Michigan and Penn State are not far behind, but these are the two teams that everyone is focusing on, that everyone is circling when they say, who am I going to send to Indianapolis at the end of the year? Frankly, these are the two teams that I'm leaning towards right now, but I'm not making a prediction until August, so we'll wait on that. This is the chance for Oregon to kick down the door, to say, we came over to the Big Ten not only to just get that extra paycheck and be a part of a bigger conference, but we're going to win it, and we want to compete with the top teams in the country. And on the flip side for Ohio State, it's a chance to assert dominance. It's a chance to say, we're still the class of this conference. We're still one of the best teams in this conference. And then you get to November 30th, and then you really make that statement against Michigan. But this game is going to be fascinating to watch. Oregon with a chance to kick down the door. Ohio State with a chance to shut them up a little bit. So it'll be fascinating to watch that one. And then the top one that I think all of us are looking forward to is Georgia at Texas. Frankly, this one puts me in a little bit of a pickle. I grew up a Texas fan. I went to UGA for college, so I'm at a loss here. But I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. I'll deal with it as it comes. But this one's on October 19th. It is going to be one of the best QB matchups of the entire year. Frankly, if you were to ask me, the best QB matchup we'll see between Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck. Texas is going to be absolutely on fire that weekend. It is the same weekend as an F1 race, so the entire city of Austin is going to be on fire. But inside that stadium, it's going to be crazy. Kirby Smart, one of the few losses, frankly, he has as a UGA head coach, came against Texas, and I promise you he has not forgotten that. So when we talk about, new rivalries popping up in these new conferences, this is one that I continue to point to because I think these teams already don't really like each other, frankly, just because of the way that the fan bases carry each other, because I'm a part of both fan bases, and it puts me in a really weird spot. But I do think this is going to be a rivalry that is going to take form in the SEC and be a huge one this upcoming season. So there's obviously a ton of other games in there. There's tons of games this season that are going to be incredible to watch. Obviously, there was going to be a big-time lean to the SEC and the Big Ten in this segment because those are where the big-time teams lie. Let's just be honest. But there's really great games across the country. We had Clemson, Florida State, not even on this list. We had Kansas State, Arizona is going to be a fantastic game on a Friday night. So there's so many great games this upcoming year, but I tried to narrow it down to 10, and I feel pretty good about my list. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for every update and content you could possibly want. We have incredible people covering every sport you could think of. So definitely, if you need anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up